about how neurotoxins released by the Clostridium bacterial genus affects neuromuscular junctions and the inhibitory neurotransmitters. I'm going to be talking about two main Clostridium bacterial species, which are Clostridium tetani, which causes tetanus, and Clostridium botulinum, which causes botulism. Okay, so the focus of my presentation really is to highlight the neurotoxins that are released and how these toxins affect our cellular pathways to act abnormally. Before I go into that, I do want to give just a few characteristics of the bacteria. Clostridium tetani are gram-positive bacilli, which means that they are in that rod-shaped form. You can see that in the photos that I provided on the right-hand side. They do have like a little, well, they're really just shaped like rods. At the end, you can see that they have like this bulb at the end. It kind of almost looks like a, what do I want to call it? I guess it kind of looks like a bit of a drumstick. So it has that drumstick appearance, and at the end, those are actually endospores. So there are different kinds of endospores: central, subterminal, terminal endospores. Clostridium tetani have terminal endospores. So that's what's shown kind of at the end. It kind of looks like I said, a drumstick. And they are known as obligate anaerobic bacteria. In simple terms, this really just means that the bacteria doesn't like oxygen. I don't like to say that it doesn't like oxygen, but it's just the simple fact that the bacteria cannot grow in the presence of oxygen. So the bacterial species itself isn't actually doing the harm, but the endospores that are formed actually do the harm and release the neurotoxins that affect our cells to act abnormally. The neurotoxins that are released from Clostridium tetani are actually two different neurotoxins. These are known as tetinolysin and tetinospasm. I'm really just going to focus on tetinospasm because of the effect that it has, and whereas tetinolysin really just causes for tissue destruction, tetinospasm actually causes what you see on that very right photo of that hand. The toxin is actually going to block the release of inhibitory neurotransmitters. So the function of this toxin is going to lead to stiffness of your muscles and just painful muscle contractions. A person can become infected by Clostridium tetani when the spores of the bacteria actually enter the human body. Now, it's important to know that the spores of tetanus or Clostridium tetani are actually found in the soil and in the dust, which makes it easier for the infection to occur. These spores often get into the body through broken skin. This usually happens through injuries of contaminated objects. A very common example of this could be becoming infected or punctured by a rusty nail or even a needle. Now, I did mention that these spores are actually found in several places in the environment, therefore making it easier for these spores to enter one's body. If you have any type of open wound, this allows an easy opportunity for the spores from Clostridium tetani to enter the body. Once the spores have entered the body and its system, you don't start to show signs or symptoms immediately, as the incubation period is anywhere from 1 week to an entire month. Usually the more aggressive forms actually show symptoms and signs a lot earlier than the less aggressive forms of tetanus. Now, the tetanus disease or infection is actually extremely uncommon in the US and isn't really something that we have to worry about, as we do have vaccinations or a tetanus vaccine available to us. But just because, it's extremely uncommon, it does not mean that there are no cases of tetanus in the US, because we do have cases, and these cases are often because those who become infected either do not or did not get their tetanus vaccine, or simply didn't keep up with their booster shots, which you actually have to get every 10 years. So it's extremely important to stay on track with your booster shots for your tetanus vaccine. Okay, so as mentioned before, the incubation period really just varies depending on the progression of the disease. There are different clinical forms of tetanus. These are known as generalized, localized, and cephalic tetanus. Um, so I'd like to go over generalized first. This is the most common form of tetanus, and this usually starts off with spasms, usually that beginning the face, which is known as trismus or commonly known as lockjaw. Now, the severity of this clinical form actually really just depends on the immunity of the patient. This is commonly influenced by their age or just generally their health overall. The amount of toxin that is released from these endospores also play a significant role in how severe their disease may or may not be. The next one I would like to go into is localized tetanus, which is actually a very uncommon form of the disease. The description of this clinical form could actually just be given in the name. Um, it's localized. It's restricted to a specific area or the side of the injury where your open wound is, that broken skin. Like let's say you got that nail in your that rusty nail in your foot. Now it's just localized. Those spasms are just localized to that one area. Now, this is definitely usually just mild, but this does not mean that it cannot become a generalized form of tetanus, though it is very uncommon for it to progress, and it usually does subside. The next one I would like to go into is actually the rarest form of tetanus, and this is known as cephalic tetanus. This is often associated with head trauma or lesions to the head or the face. Which is generally caused by whether it's skull fractures, middle ear infections, or even dental infections or tooth extractions. If your dentist or your doctor isn't using the right surgical procedures or isn't using sterile equipment, then that definitely gives the bacteria an opportunity to enter your system. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and explain how things normally happen within the synapse of our brain because this toxin is going to actually affect the synapse in the brain. So here we have the motor neuron, inhibitory neuron, and the stimulating neuron. So these neurons are going to have synaptic vesicles. Here you see them. And within these vesicles, we have neurotransmitters. So there they are. These neurotransmitters are going to be fused by these things called, or not the neurotransmitters, but the vesicles with the neurotransmitters are going to be fused by these things called snare proteins. And this is what's going to pull these vesicles and allow these neurotransmitters to be released. So I have this vesicle, it's coming here. That snare protein is pulling this vesicle in and letting it to spit out and then sending these neurotransmitters to the motor neuron. So that's how things normally happen. Now, as we know, and we should already know, Clostridium tetani their spores release a toxin or a neurotoxin known as tetanospasmin. So I'm going to show you how tetanospasmin affects this from acting abnormally or to act abnormally. So here we have the tetanospasmin toxin, and it's going to go ahead and I'm just going to say it's moving this way, and it's going to go ahead and interfere with these snare proteins. Okay. So it's going to cleave these snare proteins. Let's pretend this is the rest of the protein. And it's not going to allow it to act normally. So because it's being cleaved, these little vesicles here can no longer be fused and sent out. So this, in short, really just blocks the inhibitory neurotransmitters to reach the motor neuron. And when this happens, the stimulating excitatory neuron continues to send these neurotransmitters. So that means that it's continuing to contract. If it was acting normally and these neurotransmitters were also coming out, then it would counteract each other and cause it to stop the contraction. So because it's not there to inhibit this from happening or to counteract this effect, then that means that there's a continuous spasm that's going on to the motor neuron, and then obviously causing that continuous spasm. So the neurotransmitters that are released are known as GABA and glycine, and these are the ones that are going to be in here. And when this obviously isn't acting normally, these few things happen. So as we know, trismus happens, and this is lockjaw. Rhesus syngenicus. And this is just a severe grin. I'm going to draw a face like that. And this one's lockjaw. And if I'm pronouncing these wrong, I'm sorry. These are really hard to these are really hard to read. And opisthotnus. And this is spasm of all your muscles. And I have a picture, I believe, of a baby. The baby's kind of laying like, I don't know. It looks like all their muscles are contracted, but that's just a simultaneous contraction of all the muscles, and this is extremely severe. So severe, simultaneous spasm of all the muscles. Okay, so that's basically how that works. Okay, so the next